My dad said like he just remembered, and happy birthday to you too. I quietly stood up and told him I'm fine with getting half of what my brother got on his birthday. Is that too much to ask? Then walked out for good. I have a twin brother named Tyler. We're fraternal, not identical. Which I think matters here because people always expected us to be different, and we were. Tyler was the loud one, the athlete, the one who walked into a room and immediately had 4 people laughing at something he said. He played varsity football in high school, made homecoming court twice, and had the kind of jaw that made old ladies at church tell my mum she must be so proud. And she was. They both were. Me, I was the quiet one. I liked reading. I liked building stuff with my hands. I spent most of high school in the woodshop or in my room sketching furniture designs. I wasn't antisocial or weird or anything. I had friends. I went to parties. I had a girlfriend for a while junior year. I just wasn't Tyler. And in my family, that was apparently a deal breaker. We grew up in a suburb outside of Knoxville, Tennessee. Our dad, Richard, worked in commercial real estate. Our mom, Heather, was a dental hygienist. We had a decent house, a trampoline in the backyard, and a golden retriever named Biscuit, who was objectively the best member of the family. Biscuit loved everyone equally. Biscuit was the only one. I should mention that Tyler and I got along fine growing up. We weren't those twins who had some psychic bond or finished each other's sentences, but we shared a room until we were 12, played the same video games, argued about whose turn it was to take Biscuit out in the rain. Normal brother stuff. He wasn't mean to me. He wasn't even aware of what was happening, I don't think. He was just being himself and getting rewarded for it, while I was being myself and getting overlooked for it. There's a difference between a villain and a person who benefits from a system they didn't build. Tyler was the second one. At least back then. The favoritism wasn't always obvious when we were kids. It was subtle. It was the way my dad would film every single one of Tyler's football games, but forget to come to my woodworking showcase at school. It was the way my mom would introduce us at family events. She'd put her arm around Tyler and say something like, "This is Tyler, our little superstar. He just got nominated for Most Valuable Player." And then kind of gesture at me with a nod and say, "And this is Ethan." Period. End of sentence. No accolades, no context, just my name and the implied understanding that I was the other one. I told myself it didn't bother me. For years I told myself that. I had this whole internal narrative built up where I was the mature one, the one who didn't need validation, the one who was above keeping score. Spoiler alert, I was absolutely keeping score. I just didn't have anyone to show the scoreboard to. When we graduated high school, Tyler got a partial athletic scholarship to the University of Tennessee. Big deal. Huge family celebration. My grandparents drove up from Georgia. My dad cried. Actual tears. I'm talking the kind of crying you see in movies when the soldier comes home, over a scholarship that covered about 40% of tuition. Meanwhile, I got accepted into a trade program for furniture making and woodcraft in Asheville, North Carolina. A really good one, actually. Competitive admission, small cohort, hands-on apprenticeship with working artisans. When I told my parents, my mum said, "Oh, that's nice, honey. Will you at least get a real degree too?" My dad asked me how much it cost, and then changed the subject to Tyler's upcoming orientation weekend. That was the template for everything. Tyler does something, family celebrates. Ethan does something, family shrugs. Tyler graduated college, big party. I finished my program and started getting commissions for custom furniture, and my mom asked me if I'd thought about going back to school for something more stable. Tyler got engaged to his girlfriend, Lauren. Massive engagement dinner at a nice restaurant downtown. I started dating a woman named Megan, who I met at a craft fair in Asheville, and my parents didn't meet her for almost a year because they just never asked about my life. Megan noticed it before I was even willing to talk about it. She'd come to family dinners with me and sit there watching my parents orbit around Tyler like he was the sun. She'd see my dad ask Tyler about his job, his fantasy football league, his weekend plans, his opinion on the Titans draft picks, and then never once turned to me with a single question. After one Thanksgiving, Megan looked at me in the car on the drive home and said, "Ethan, does your family even know you exist?" I laughed it off, but it sat in my chest like a brick. By the time our 25th birthday rolled around, I'd built a pretty solid life for myself. I had a small but growing furniture business. I was building custom dining tables, bookshelves, bed frames, and other handcrafted furniture that people were willing to pay good money for. My work had even been featured in a local design magazine in Asheville. Megan and I had been together for 2 years, and we had recently moved into a rental house that came with an option to buy it someday. My parents decided they wanted to throw a joint birthday dinner for Tyler and me. They said turning 25 was a big milestone, a full quarter of a century, and it deserved a proper celebration. They reserved a private room at a steakhouse in Knoxville and invited around 30 people. Family friends, Tilar's college buddies, Lauren's parents, and plenty of relatives were all on the guest list. The dinner was supposed to celebrate both of us, or at least that was what the invitation claimed. It literally said, "Come celebrate Tyler and Ethan's 25th birthday." On paper, our names were treated equally. Megan and I drove over from Asheville the evening before. We stayed in a hotel because my parents had converted their old guest room into what my mum proudly called a memory room. In reality, it was basically a shrine dedicated to Tyler's sports career. The room was filled with trophies, jerseys, framed newspaper articles, and every award he had ever won. I am not exaggerating. They even had a shadow box displaying his homecoming sash. Megan looked around the room without saying a word. She simply reached over and squeezed my hand. That evening, we arrived at the restaurant right on time. I will admit they had done a nice job decorating the room. There were balloons everywhere, a huge birthday banner, and a cake with both of our names written across it. Tyler was already there with Lauren, working the room like always, shaking hands, hugging everyone, and soaking up every bit of attention. I walked in, hugged my mom, greeted my dad, and then spent most of my time near the edges of the room catching up with my aunt and a couple of cousins. Dinner was served around 7 o'clock, and once everyone had their food, my dad stood up with his glass in his hand. He tapped it until the room fell silent. I remember thinking this was finally the moment where both of us would be recognized for reaching 25 years old. It felt like it should have been a nice memory. Instead, what happened next became something I will never forget for the rest of my life. Looking back now, I am actually grateful it happened because that was the moment that finally forced me to see the truth. The weeks after that birthday dinner felt strange. There was no huge fight and no dramatic confrontation. Everything just became quiet. I stopped calling my parents. I quit sending the first text. I stopped carrying the entire relationship on my own. The sad part is that they did not even seem to notice. In fact, it took almost 3 full weeks before my mum finally sent me a message saying, "Haven't heard from you in a while. Everything okay?" She did not call. She only sent a text, and it did not even sound worried. It felt more like someone suddenly remembered they had forgotten to water a houseplant and wanted to check if it was still alive. I replied with, "Yep, just busy with work." She answered with nothing but a thumbs-up emoji. That was the entire conversation. Meanwhile, Megan kept gently encouraging me without ever trying to force me into anything. She was the kind of person who never ordered you around. Instead, she asked questions that quietly made you realize what you should have figured out yourself. One day, she asked if I had ever considered talking to a professional about everything involving my family. I immediately told her I did not need therapy. She smiled and said, "Everybody needs therapy. You just happen to need it for this." She was right. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Reeves in early March. He was an older man with a calm voice and one of those faces that made you feel completely safe, like nothing you could possibly say would shock him. During our first appointment, I told him everything that had happened at the birthday dinner. He listened carefully, nodded, and then quietly asked, "How long have you been performing okayness for everyone else?" I just stared at him for about 15 seconds before I started laughing, because nobody had ever described my entire life so perfectly in a single sentence. Therapy opened parts of me I did not even realize had been locked away. I slowly began to understand why I had always worked so hard to be the bigger person, the one who never needed anything, the one who always claimed everything was fine. Somewhere over the years, I had accepted the message my parents kept sending me without ever saying it out loud. If they never believed I deserved to be celebrated, then I convinced myself that wanting to be celebrated must have been the problem. If they constantly overlooked me, I decided that needing attention must have been some kind of weakness. I took years of neglect, wrapped it into my personality, and convinced myself it was maturity. Dr. Reeves helped me understand that creating distance from my parents was not about getting revenge or punishing them. It was about protecting myself. He told me something I wrote down immediately. He said, "You can love people from a distance. You can wish them well without handing them the scissors and pointing at your own strings." Those words stayed with me. While all of that emotional work was happening behind the scenes, my business was quietly taking off in ways I never expected. This is where everything in my life slowly started changing. Around the same time that birthday disaster happened, I got a message from a woman named Natalie. She worked as an interior designer on high-end residential projects around the Charlotte area. She had seen my furniture featured in the local design magazine and wanted to hire me for a major custom project. Her client wanted a complete dining room, set built from scratch, including a dining table, 8 matching chairs, and a custom buffet, all made by hand from solid hardwood. The project was the biggest commission anyone had ever offered me. The total budget was $18,000, and honestly, I almost turned it down. Imposter syndrome hit me hard, and that voice in my head kept telling me I was not good enough. Megan actually stood behind me while I typed my acceptance email just to make sure I did not back out at the last second. I spent the next 3 months building that dining set. Most days I worked 14 hours straight in my shop. I handpicked every board myself and cut dovetail joints that nobody would ever notice because I wanted every single detail to be perfect, whether anyone saw it or not. When I finally delivered everything, Natalie's client got emotional. She actually had tears in her eyes and told me it was the most beautiful furniture she had ever seen. Natalie photographed the entire set, added it to her design portfolio, and tagged my business when she shared it online. That one post changed everything. Within 2 months, I had a waiting list of customers. Natalie introduced me to 3 more interior designers. A boutique hotel in Asheville hired me to build custom headboards and nightstands for all 12 of its guest rooms. Then a restaurant owner contacted me about creating a live edge bar top. The work kept piling up until I had no choice but to hire my first employee, a guy named Mason. We had gone through the same trade program together, and at the time he was working in a cabinet shop. Not long after that, I hired a second employee, a woman named Chloe. She had just completed her apprenticeship, and her joinery skills were honestly incredible. By the time summer rolled around, Ethan Brooks Woodworks was officially incorporated. I had moved into a real workshop instead of working out of a garage. I finally had business cards, and Megan built me a professional website because she somehow seemed amazing at everything she touched. For the first time in my life, I was earning more money than I had ever imagined. More importantly, I was creating something that truly mattered to me. It carried my name, reflected my work, and nobody could brush it off as a hobby, a temporary phase, or some backup plan anymore. That same summer, Megan and I got engaged. I proposed on the front porch of our rental house one Wednesday evening in July because it marked the anniversary of our first date. I had also made her a walnut ring box by hand with an inlay of the mountains we could see from our porch. She did not even let me finish asking the question. She smiled and said, "Oh my God, yes. Obviously, you ridiculous man, yes." I honestly do not think I have ever been happier than I was in that moment. I did not tell my parents about our engagement for 2 weeks. It was not because I wanted to punish them. The truth was that calling them simply never crossed my mind anymore. That was how much distance had grown between us. When I finally mentioned it during a short phone call with my mum, she said, "Oh, that's wonderful. You know, Tyler and Lauren are thinking about having kids soon." I almost burst out laughing. I had just told her I was getting married, and somehow she managed to switch the conversation to Tyler's future children in the very next breath. The holidays that year felt completely different. For the first time, Megan and I skipped Thanksgiving in Knoxville. Instead, we stayed in Asheville and hosted dinner ourselves. Mason came over, Chloe brought her boyfriend, and Megan's sister flew in from Portland. We cooked far more food than anyone could eat, spent the evening playing board games, and laughed until my stomach hurt. It was easily the best Thanksgiving I could remember. My mom did not take it well. She sent me several text messages that went from trying to make me feel guilty to passive-aggressive comments and finally to openly hurt feelings. One message read, "I just don't understand why you wouldn't want to spend the holiday with your family. Tyler and Lauren are here, and they were asking about you. Your father is very disappointed." I answered respectfully, but stood my ground. I told her we had already made plans for Thanksgiving, and maybe we could see everyone around Christmas instead. She did not reply for 2 full days. Christmas played out much the same way. I agreed to spend Christmas Day in Knoxville, but I made it clear that Megan and I would stay in a hotel and would not be there for the entire weekend. My mom reacted as though I had told her we were spending Christmas behind bars, but we went anyway, and everything happened exactly the way I expected it would. Tyler got the full Christmas morning experience. The gifts stacked around him seemed endless. Everyone wanted to hear about his job. My dad spent forever asking detailed questions about his goals for the coming year. My mom and Lauren even talked excitedly about baby names, despite the fact that nobody was expecting a baby yet. Meanwhile, I sat on the couch beside Megan, watching everything from the outside the same way I always had. The only difference was that this time I was no longer pretending it did not hurt. I simply observed it, quietly filed it away, and added another piece of evidence reminding me that I had made the right decision by building a life somewhere else with someone who truly valued me. We left around 2 o'clock that afternoon. As we drove away, Megan looked at me and quietly said, "You're not the same person you were a year ago." She was absolutely right. I was not that man anymore. I had finally stopped begging for scraps from a table where there had never been a place set for me. What nobody in my family realized yet was that the table I had been building for myself was about to become much bigger than any of them could imagine. My dad raised his glass and slowly looked around the room with that big, warm smile on his face. It was the exact smile I had spent my entire life trying to earn. Then he began talking about Tyler. He told everyone about the day we were born and how Tyler arrived first, screaming at the top of his lungs like he had entered the world ready to conquer it. My dad went on about Tyler's first steps, his first words, and his first football touchdown. He told everyone how, at 7 years old, Tyler stood up to a bully on the playground, saying that was the moment he knew his son was destined for something special. Then he praised Tyler's football career, his work ethic, his personality, and how he could light up any room. He even talked about Lauren and how proud he was that Tyler had found such an amazing woman. He kept going, bragging about Tyler's new job in sports marketing and saying he had no doubt Tyler would rise straight to the top. The speech lasted almost 10 minutes. 10 full minutes of my father standing in front of 30 people pouring his heart out about my brother. People were tearing up. My mom wiped her eyes with a napkin. Lauren held her hand against her chest, and Tyler sat there looking humble while I sat only a few seats away, feeling something inside me finally break after 25 years. When my dad finished, he paused for a second, lifted his glass, and simply said, "And happy birthday to you too, Ethan." That was it. Just 7 words. A few people awkwardly mumbled happy birthday. Then everyone went right back to eating. After a 10-minute speech about Tilla, I got a quick afterthought. Like a note added at the bottom of someone else's letter, I stayed there for another 10 minutes, cutting my steak, pushing my mashed potatoes around and pretending to eat. Megan kept her hand on my knee under the table. I could feel her watching me, but I could not look at her because I knew I would lose it if I did. My throat tightened, my eyes burned, and I refused to fall apart in front of 30 people who had just watched my father erase me from my own birthday. Finally, I set my napkin down, leaned toward Megan, and quietly said, "I need to go." She grabbed her purse without asking questions, and we stood up. Most people did not even notice until we were almost at the door. My aunt called out, "Ethan, where are you going?" "They haven't brought out the cake yet." I just answered, "I'm not feeling well. Tell everyone goodbye." And we walked out. The drive back to the hotel was silent for several minutes. Then I pulled into a gas station parking lot, shut the car off, and stared through the windshield with my hands gripping the steering wheel. Megan did not rush me. She simply waited. Then everything crashed over me at once. I was not sad anymore. I was angry. Not the kind of anger that makes you yell. The quiet kind that settles deep inside you and spreads through your whole body. 25 years of always being second. 25 years of feeling invisible in my own family. 25 years of watching my parents give Tyler every bit of their attention, while I stood a few feet away pretending it did not matter. And for what? Because I built furniture instead of playing football? Because I was quiet instead of loud? Because I never gave them a reason to put me on a pedestal? Megan finally broke the silence. She looked at me and said, "You don't deserve this. You never did. And I'm done watching you pretend you're okay." I nodded because I still could not trust myself to speak. When we got back to the hotel, my phone would not stop buzzing. My mom texted first. "Where did you go? Your father is upset. You embarrassed us by leaving early. Tyler is worried about you." Not once did she ask why I had left. It was all about how everyone else felt. Tyler texted next. "Hey bro, you okay? Mum said you left. Hope you're feeling better. Wish you stayed for the cake. It was really good." The truth is, Tyler was not trying to be hurtful. He was not a bad person. He had simply spent his whole life being the center of everything, so he never even noticed the imbalance. Asking him to see it was like asking a fish to notice water. I did not answer either of them that night. In our hotel room, Megan and I talked about everything for the first time. Not the version where I convinced myself I was above needing approval, but the truth. I admitted how much it had always hurt. Every event they skipped, every one-sided conversation, every time my dad barely listened when I talked about my work, but lit up the second Tyler spoke. I even told Megan about when I was 16 and won first place in a state woodworking competition. But my parents never came because Tyler had a football scrimmage that same day. It was only a scrimmage, not even a real game. I told Megan about the time I overheard my dad telling my uncle he worried about me because I had no real ambition, while I was in the next room sanding a custom piece that was paying me $400 at just 17 years old. I also told her how my mum once introduced me to one of her co-workers as Tyler's brother, instead of using my name. Megan listened quietly, then asked me something that changed my life. She said, "Ethan, you've spent your whole life waiting for them to see you. What if they never do? Then what?" I did not have an answer. But that question stayed with me. It settled deep in my mind and slowly changed the way I saw my family and myself. The next morning my mom called. I let it ring. She called again and I ignored it again. Then my dad called, which almost never happened. I nearly answered out of surprise, but I let it go to voicemail. He left a message. Later, I listened to it. "Ethan, your mother said you left because you weren't feeling well. Hope you're better. Call us when you can. Tyler wants to grab brunch before you head home." That was all. No apology, no questions, no sign that either of them understood why I had walked out. Megan and I checked out of the hotel and drove back to Asheville without calling anyone. For the first time, I did not feel guilty. Instead, I felt something different. I felt done. Not in an angry, dramatic way, just quietly done. I stopped reaching for people who never reached back. I accepted that they had my number all along and simply chose not to use it. I stopped showing up where I felt invisible and started putting my energy into the people who truly saw me. That was the turning point. Everything changed after that, and over the next year my life went in a direction none of us expected. Success does not usually arrive with fireworks. It starts quietly, like a steady hum that grows louder over time, until people finally notice it. By the following spring, Ethan Brooks Woodworks was thriving. Natalie, the designer who had trusted me with that first big project, introduced me to architects and interior designers all across the Carolinas. Soon, complete strangers were calling me for estimates on jobs I never would have believed I could land just 2 years earlier. One couple in Savannah hired me for a fully custom kitchen. A boutique chain wanted handmade display furniture for 3 stores. Then a music producer in Nashville asked me to build a recording studio desk from reclaimed barnwood with built-in cable management. That project alone paid $22,000. My team had grown to 5 people. Mason and Chloe were running most jobs beside me. I also hired Carter, who specialized in finishing, and a young apprentice named Avery. She reminded me of myself at 18, quiet, hard-working, and far more talented than she realized. We had moved into a 3,000-square-foot workshop with a real commercial lease, and for the first time I was planning years ahead, instead of just worrying about the next month. Megan and I also bought the house we had been renting. We closed in March. It was not huge. Just a 3-bedroom craftsman with a wraparound porch overlooking the Blue Ridge Mountains. But it was ours. Our names were on the deed, and every room felt like part of the future we were building together. I kept seeing Dr. Reeves every other week. Not because I was falling apart, but because learning who you are never really ends. He helped me create what he called clear boundaries with my family. Not walls or ultimatums, just honest limits on what I would and would not accept. I stopped chasing conversations that led nowhere. I stopped pretending family holidays felt normal. I even stopped answering my mum's texts the second they arrived, like I always used to. Then something happened that nobody expected. Tyler lost his job. The sports marketing company where he worked went through layoffs in April, and even the golden child was not safe from corporate cuts. To my surprise, Tyler called me himself. We hardly talked anymore, but this time he sounded completely shaken. He was not completely devastated. He sounded more confused than anything, like someone who had always believed life would reward him for doing everything right. He said, "I just don't get it, man. I did everything I was supposed to do. I honestly felt bad for him. Losing a job is frightening, and no matter how I felt about the way our parents treated us, I never wanted my brother to struggle. I told him I was sorry, asked if he and Lauren were doing okay financially, and let him know I was there if he needed someone to talk to. It was the first real conversation we had shared in months. Then things took an unexpected turn. 2 days later, my dad called me. Richard, the same man who had given me only 7 words at my own birthday dinner, was suddenly calling on a Thursday afternoon. I almost ignored it, but curiosity got the better of me. He said, "Ethan, your brother's having a tough time. I was wondering if maybe you had some work for him until he figures things out." Think about that for a second. My father had never taken any real interest in my business. He had never visited my shop, never asked about my work, never even looked at my website. Now he wanted me to hire his favorite son at the company he had spent years treating like it did not matter. I stayed quiet for a moment before asking, "Dad, what exactly does my company do?" There was a long pause. Finally he answered, "You build furniture, right? Tables and stuff." Tables and stuff. That stung more than I expected. 2 months earlier, I had been featured in Southern Living magazine. I had been interviewed on a podcast about modern American craftsmanship, and I had just signed a $60,000 contract for a hotel renovation. Yet my own father still thought I made tables and stuff. I calmly explained that my shop was not really set up for someone with no woodworking experience, and that Tyler would probably be better off finding another job in his own field. My dad got quiet before saying, "I just thought family helps family." The irony was almost unbelievable. A few weeks later, my mum called with a different idea. She said she and my dad wanted to visit us in Asheville for the weekend, see our house, tour my shop, and spend some time together. She tried to sound casual, but I knew there was more behind it. That evening, I talked it over with Megan. She said, "It's your decision. Just remember, if they come, they're stepping into your world this time." I agreed to let them visit for one Saturday. Lunch, a tour of the shop, and maybe dinner afterward, if everything went well. My mum sounded relieved when I said yes. The visit happened in late May, almost 1 year after that birthday dinner. My parents arrived from Knoxville, and Tyler and Lauren came with them. We started at our house. My mum looked around the living room filled with furniture I had built and simply said, "Oh, this is nice." It sounded polite, but distant, like she was complimenting a stranger's home instead of her son's. My dad mostly stayed quiet, slowly looking around without saying much. Della, though, seemed honestly impressed. He kept touching the furniture and saying, "Wait, you built this? Seriously? This is incredible." Lauren chatted with Megan about the house and the porch, and she was as kind and attentive as always. Then we headed to my workshop. This was the place that meant the most to me. It was where everything I had built and everything I dreamed of building came to life. Letting my family see it felt strangely personal. Mason and Chloe were there finishing the recording studio desk for the Nashville client. I introduced everyone, showed them the lumber racks, the tool wall, the finishing room, the projects in progress, my design board, and the magazine articles hanging on the wall beside photos of completed work. My dad stood there quietly, looking around the shop. For the first time in my life, I saw something different in his eyes. It was not pride exactly, but it was close. It looked like he had finally been confronted with something he could not dismiss. He looked around one more time and quietly said, "This is a real operation you've got here." It was not much, but the way he said it told me something had finally reached him, and what happened later that evening at dinner changed everything. We went to one of Megan's and my favorite restaurants in downtown Asheville. It was a small place with great food and a quiet atmosphere where people could actually talk. I picked it on purpose. If this conversation was going to happen, I wanted it in my town, on my terms. For the first hour, everything stayed polite. My mum talked about her garden, Lauren mentioned a cooking class, and Tyler was unusually quiet. He kept looking at me like he was seeing me in a different way, but did not know what to say. Everything changed when dessert arrived. My mum started talking about Tyler's job search, saying how unfair the layoff had been, how talented he was, and how any company would be lucky to hire him. Then she turned to me and said, "Ethan, are you sure there isn't something Tyler could do at your little shop, even part-time? It would mean so much to your father and me." My little shop. There it was again. Another reminder that everything I had built was still being treated like some small hobby. I set my fork down. Megan rested her hand on my knee, and I calmly asked, "Mum, can I ask you something? Do you know what my company made last year?" She blinked. My dad looked up from his plate. Tyler and Lauren stopped moving. "Just over $380,000, I said. "I have 5 employees. I work with designers and hotels in 4 states. I was featured in Southern Living, and I just signed a contract to furnish a boutique hotel in Charleston. This is not a little shop. It's my career. It's my life's work. The fact that you didn't know any of that tells me how little attention you've paid." The table fell completely silent. My mum opened her mouth but could not find the words. My dad just stared at me. I kept going. "Do you remember my 25th birthday dinner? Dad, you stood up and spent 10 minutes talking about Tyler, his football career, his job, his future. Then you looked at me and said, 'And happy birthday to you too, Ethan.' 7 words, I counted. My mum quietly said, 'Ethan, that's not what happened.' 'Yes, it is,' I answered. And it wasn't the first time. It was just the first time I stopped pretending it did not hurt. I looked at my dad. 'You never came to one of my woodworking showcases. You missed my state competition because Tyler had a scrimmage. Until today, you had never even been inside my shop. You never asked about my business. And Mum, you've introduced me as Tyler's brother instead of using my name. Every conversation about my life somehow became a conversation about him. Do you have any idea what that does to someone after 25 years? My mom started crying. My dad looked down at the table. Tyler sat there with his mouth slightly open. Then, to my surprise, Tyler spoke. He's right. Everyone turned toward him. He put both hands on the table and said, Mom, Dad, he's right. I've always seen it. I just never knew how to stop it because I was the one benefiting from it. Every holiday, every dinner, every conversation has always been about me. I let it happen because it felt good, and that was wrong. I should have said something years ago. Lauren gently placed her hand on his arm. My mom was crying openly now, but my dad still had not said a word. I looked straight at him. I need to hear from you. You're the one who stood up at that birthday dinner and showed everyone exactly how much I mattered to you. He sat there for a long time before finally clearing his throat. I didn't know how to be proud of something I didn't understand, he said. Tyler did things I recognized. Sports, competition. I understood that world. But your woodworking, your craft, I didn't understand it. I never knew how to talk about it, so I stayed silent. After enough years, that silence turned into not seeing you at all. I'm not proud of that. You deserved a father who tried harder. Then he looked me in the eyes, and for the first time in my life, I saw real regret there. It was not the kind of regret people put on for show. It was real, the kind that sits heavy in your chest and makes it hard to breathe. I'm not going to pretend that one dinner fixed 25 years of hurt, because it did not. But it was a beginning. For the first time, someone in my family admitted what had happened instead of brushing it aside, making excuses, or changing the subject. My mom apologized through tears. She kept saying she never realized how bad it had been. I am still not sure I completely believe that, but I do think she finally understood how much damage it had caused. There is a difference between knowing you favor one child and realizing what that does to the other. The next morning, Tyler and I sat on my porch drinking coffee before they drove back to Knoxville. He looked at me and said, I owe you more than an apology. I owe you years of being a better brother. I told him I was not looking for repayment. I just wanted things to change. He nodded and said, then they will. Now, about 6 months later, life is different. Not perfect, but different in ways that matter. My dad calls every couple of weeks. The conversations are still short because that is just who he is. But now he asks about my business. He wants to know what I am building. Last month, he even asked me to explain dovetail joints, and I spent 20 minutes walking him through it over the phone while he quietly listened. After I posted a photo of one finished project, he texted me, "That's beautiful work, son." Only 4 words, but they were the 4 words I had waited my whole life to hear. My mom is trying too. She still gets it wrong sometimes, but I can see the effort. She sent Megan a birthday card with a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for loving my son the way he deserves." Megan cried, and honestly, I almost did too. Tyler eventually found a great job with a sports media company in Atlanta. He and Lauren moved there, and now he calls me just to talk, not because of family gatherings. A month ago, he came back to my shop by himself and spent hours watching us work. Before he left, he smiled and said, "I'm proud of you, man. I should have told you that years ago. As for me, Ethan Brooks Woodworks just signed its first 6-figure contract. A resort in the Smoky Mountains hired us to build custom furniture for its lobby and restaurant. Megan and I are getting married in October on our porch with the mountains behind us, surrounded by the people who truly stood by us. I cannot honestly say I have forgiven everything. Forgiveness is not something that happens all at once. It is more like sanding a rough piece of wood. You keep working at it, little by little, until the sharp edges begin to disappear. There are still moments when an old memory comes back, and I feel like that little kid sitting at the table wondering why nobody noticed him. But those moments do not last as long anymore. The life I built without their approval, without their attention, and without their help is the greatest thing I have ever created. My dad gave me 7 words on my birthday. I gave myself everything else. A successful business with my name on it. A woman who truly sees me. A home I love, filled with furniture I built with my own hands. If you are reading this and you have always been the overlooked sibling, the forgotten twin, or the kid nobody seemed to notice, remember this. The people who fail to see your worth do not get to decide your value. Build your own table. Fill it with people who choose you. And when you finally sit down, you will realize that the life you built for yourself is worth more than the approval you spent years chasing. My name is Ethan. I build furniture. But the best thing I ever built was a life that finally belongs to me.